Well, a happy Monday to you all. My name is Bob Bianchi. I'm going to be with you from 12 to 3. And if you know you're watching the Law and Crime Network, we got murder and mayhem all the time, gavel to gavel coverage. And we have two new fascinating trials that we're going to be covering for you. Okay, so there's the prosecution's opening statement in the Nelson case. Let me bring on my two great guests. You can't get better guys than this. The first one, Joseph Scott Morgan, is with us. He's a distinguished scholar of applied forensics at Jacksonville State University. He's got so many credentials. I always got to go through a board certified fellow of the American Board of Medico-Legal Death Investigations. He has worked in the coroner's office and the medical examiner's office. He's considered one of the leading experts on the coroner system in the United States. Particular research interests in the area of estimation of time of death, injury assessment of scenes of death, mass fatality investigations, notification of next of kin methodologies, impact of notification on next of kin, forensic practice and rural settings. He's appeared on numerous major networks like Headline News, CNN, as an on-air forensics expert, and in 2013 was named Georgia Author of the Year for his memoir entitled, I love this title, Blood Beneath My Feet, The Journey of a Southern Death Investigator. Joseph, welcome back to the show. It's been a while.
Hey, yeah, you bet, Bob. Good to be with you. And hey, for $1.95, all of that will get me a cup of coffee. So there you go.
Well, it's an impressive background, and actually, I've contacted you myself personally on cases. That's the level of respect that I have for you on some of my criminal defense cases I currently have, and of course, my bestie there, Gene Rossi, hashtag 4041. He shot a 40-point game in high school, followed up by a 41-point game. They were yelling, give the ball to Rossi, and it just didn't end there. He did the same kind of magnificence at the Department of Justice, 30 years there. He was so well regarded for his over 100 jury trials and training of 1,000 prosecutors, and I'm still jealous about this, but in a good way, because Gene's my friend. They've got the Gene Rossi War Room. There could be nothing better for a tenacious litigator to have that as something that people will remember you by. Gene, how you doing?
I'm doing well. After that remark, I might as well shut up.
All right. Hey, Joseph, listen, you're listening to this opening statement here. What are you seeing from a death investigator's point of view about the forensic in the case so far, even though we didn't get that much data? You have any general thoughts about what you've seen? Brutality,
if I could sum it up in one word. That coupled with what you had said earlier about the shenanigans this guy had been involved in a few years ago with his dad. Seems like he's got a modus operandi here where he loves duct tape for some reason. This is up close and personal. She did get into forensics, Bob. She talked about the knife that they found, and it was sufficient to the task. The blade length is sufficient to have generated these injuries. This is brutal. I don't know that he could have chosen a nicer person, a more benign, benevolent kind of person who takes care of people and just takes her out and just absolutely slaughters her.
Yeah, and Gene, to that point, I mean, it seems, I don't know how random this was or not. I guess we'll find out a little bit about this, but basically goes into that house and abducts her and commits these horrible actions. And then this thing that's just so peculiar to me, this multi-page letter that he writes to the judge, complaining that he's not being fed properly. He lost 40 pounds, and that he could lead them to other robberies as well as 8 other unsolved murders. Now, whether the guy's lying, he's making that up, he's crazy, we don't know. But I'm also told from our fact sheet, when we look into these cases in depth, that he did help the police find a knife that allegedly is a knife that may have been used in this case. What do you think so far about the proofs in the case?
Well, I think they have a very strong evidence. And regarding his letter, it just reminded me, if I'm the prosecutor, and of course you were one too, Bob, are you willing to meet with this defendant dropping the death penalty if he can show where other bodies are? Is it worth it to the government, the state of Florida, to give him a pass on the death penalty in order to possibly solve other homicides? That could be a question that they're talking about right now.
Yeah, it's a very good practical consideration. I've handled a couple of cases, but one in particular that I was involved in was the Cullen case. You guys may remember it was a national attention. He was a nurse, and he had been in multiple medical facilities and basically was giving drugs to patients that were killing them. And there were a number of people that had suspected that their loved ones died at his hands, and he was there when we checked the records at the relevant time period that person was there. And there was a lot of pressure by the families who wanted closure for his statement to find out whether or not their loved ones were actually killed by him. And that is a very important prosecutorial decision for sure. Joseph, real quick, what do we expect in terms of the forensic evidence, or if you were doing this kind of investigation, what do you think would be most powerful for the prosecution to present, or that you'd like to get out in order to really, put the nail in the coffin, if you will? Not, keeping in mind it's a death penalty case, and the worse you can make it, the better it is for the prosecution.
Yeah, it's a lot of this is going to rest on imagery and how they can kind of introduce this into court. Sometimes the courts are hesitant to allow some photographs that come in from the scene, but at minimum, you're going to have to get, if there's forced entry of struggle or evidence of struggle at the scene, forced entry. But the most powerful thing that will hit this jury in the chest like a 10-pound sledgehammer is going to be those images of her bound, the tape around her eyes, around her mouth. And then after the body was cleaned, they'll be able to demonstrate these knife injuries. What's really curious, I'd be interested to know if there is any fracturing of this blade within her body. If it struck bone, you can have some of these metallic pieces that'll break off, and X-rays can play a huge part in this. You can actually see these little metallic bodies that are free floating in the chest cavity, and if they get the forensic pathologist on the stand, they begin to talk about this and say, well, we can actually pinpoint the track of this injury and demonstrate it to you vis-a-vis this.
Great points, Joseph. And I think to your point, the idea of seeing her bound with that duct tape and her hands bound and her legs bound just really brings out that torture factor. What this poor lady must have been going through before her ultimate demise certainly will not make a sympathetic defendant for sure. All right, guys, listen, Joseph Scott Morgan, Gene Rossi, love having you guys on the show. We're going to do a little business here at the Law and Crime Network. We've got a lot of trials to cover. Stick with us. We'll be right back. Okay, so prosecution's opening statement in the Scott Nelson case. Gene Rossi, we're hearing all sorts of things about the Walmart. I love these guys going to the Walmart. I mean, it's like it's like Murder Central or whatever. They got video surveillance all over the place, and there's a guy buying the hat, tennis, shoes, duct tape, zip ties, a knife. You wonder at a certain point in time whether or not some of this should be reported. Hey, we got a guy buying some pretty ominous-looking things. Nevertheless, little sidebar from me. They perfectly matched the knife that they found that was used to kill the victim in the case. They talked about him going to a Wells Fargo ATM where he took out money on the victim's account. Publix, where the victim's car was in a lot, to a bus stop where buses were changed, back to the ATM another time. He goes to a 7-Eleven to buy a pizza. That's always a good little, I always think that's a good little shot. This is what he's concerned about, to make sure his needs are being met. Bag and a trash can in the train station, using the ATM card again. He was arrested on 10/1, and in a letter to law enforcement, he told them where to find the keys to the victim's car, and in fact, at that location, they found the victim's keys. Gene, sounds like a pretty good case.
Well, I'm wondering if the defendant offered to plead guilty to life in exchange for them dropping the death penalty. I mean, how stupid can you be to leave the knife right near where the body is, Jennifer's body is? And you're right about the pizza. That's one of those little factoids that really shows the defendant is a narcissist, he's greedy, he's selfish, and he's a killer. The ATM speaks for itself. He wanted the money. But during this whole chaotic event, he has to get a pizza.
Yes, something that we probably would be too sick to even eat, but not a guy that's very cool, calm, and collected. The only notes I have from our breakdown about the plea, and it's very interesting questions all the time, is he turned down a plea deal saying he wants to be able to speak at the penalty phase. And we know from the anecdotal evidence that we've read in court documents here at the Lone Crime Network and information that we get in our briefings that he's going to try to claim he had a very difficult life, that he suffers from some mental illness. But it was kind of interesting that he already knew, I'm going right to a penalty phase, and that's the basis upon which he rejected a plea. And, you know, I actually had a murder defendant I defended one time where I got him an unbelievable plea offer, but he insisted on rejecting it because he wanted to tell his story from the witness stand in the courtroom, which I thought was completely cockamamie and insane. It made me actually think about his mental well-being. We ultimately worked that case out, but there are those folks that just are so narcissistic, they want to get up there, they want to tell their story, and they think they can wiggle their way out. What do you think, Gene?
Oh my God, Zacharias Moussaoui pleaded guilty, knowing that he could face the death penalty. He was going to do the same thing. Talk about why he was the 20th hijacker for 9/11. These individuals, they don't think rationally. I mean, you know, you're leaving a knife near Jennifer's body. You're doing all this stuff with the ATM and the pizza. We joke about that. But this is a person who's a little scatterbrained, but he does have the mental wherewithal to form premeditation.
Yeah.
There's no mental defect or mental deficiency here. He had the ability for premeditation, and I got to compliment that prosecutor. She didn't use any notes. She was methodical, paused, and she focused on premeditation.
Right. She actually used the word premeditation when she was talking about those supplies. Joseph, I'm curious, can you give us an idea of the term of art DNA connectivity and what it means to this case?
Yeah, you know, they found in her SUV that had been abandoned, they found a bloody towel. There's remnant of blood on this knife that turns out to be her. So at an elemental level, that base level that you know, that defines us who we are as an individual, that's found on the knife. And the difficult thing on the shoulders of the defense is how are they going to get past this idea that her blood wound up on a knife that's found not too far away from her body, and that is specifically connectivity. And I don't know if they found any kind of trace DNA or trace evidence of his. That would be the grand slam if you could do that, where you could put both of their DNA together and couple it. And that's very, very, very difficult to get past. You know, kind of dovetailing with what Gene was saying just a second ago, this fellow seems very impulsive. That you know, you'd mentioned the word primal, where he's going to these kind of baser instincts, where you know he's going to get pizza and he's looking to get as much money as he can, almost like a street thug that's just kind of going out robbing people and then going out and taking as much as he possibly can at one time and then running away. My question is this, and I think this is going to go to this bigger issue relative to taking capital punishment off the table, is at some point in time, is this guy connected to other murders that are out there and currently unsolved, and they're going to try to leverage this?
Well, you know, it's funny that you should mention that, because I want to segue before we take our next commercial break with the idea that tactically he may be wanting to go to the penalty phase. Maybe he can save his life, maybe not. But he still has those cards of what he claims to be 8 homicides in his pocket and other robberies. And he may be deciding, instead of doing it now to get a better deal, let me see what happens with the trial, because I always got those ace cards in my pocket should I be convicted. And I think as a defense strategy, that's something that could be very effective. Guys, that's why I love having you on. You give the great explanations and the nuances of what we do as lawyers and as forensic investigators. As so crucial to a case like this. We're going to do a little business here at the Law and Crime Network, but we're going to have some more fascinating stuff coming up, because we've got 2 great trials that we're covering. As you know, gavel to gavel. We'll be right back.